Well, I would just like to thank and welcome Lorrie Warren. And I was trying to figure out, Lorrie, I think we've been friends for like 25 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and someone who knows the community, knows what's needed in the community, and she's going to give a little bit of more of an introduction of herself. But thank you.
Thanks, Margie. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think when we discussed about this presentation, we wanted to talk a little bit about probate court and the role of the court investigator. And I think today we'll talk a little bit about incompetency, incapacity, and self-determination. And there's a little theme message as we go along, and you'll get that theme message as we go along today. But first of all, thanks again for having me. My name is Lorrie Warren, and I'm a court investigator with Judge Stormer's probate court in Summit County. And I've been doing this for 30 years, and I'll get into the role of the court investigator here in a little bit. But it's important, I think, to start off with, as professionals, we need to change how we see vulnerable adults, not how we look at them. And by that, I mean, we need to see the actual person that still has dreams, that still has things to contribute, that still carries so much wisdom that we can take with us and learn from them. Sometimes people have a tendency to look at that vulnerable adult as somebody who's old, frail, forgets their telephone number or address, is sometimes confused, somebody who's dependent on others, has mobility issues, and we need to kind of step back and actually see that person how they are. So my role as a court investigator is kind of unique. Every probate court in the state of Ohio has one or more court investigators. And by unique, I mean that we work with every population professionally, as well as the folks that we serve. We serve individuals, older adults, mental health, developmentally disabled. We do a lot of some of the minor guardianships, but we won't talk too much about that today. But the other thing that we have the advantage of is we work with a variety of populations professionally. We work with social workers, hospitals, of course, attorneys and judges, law enforcement, healthcare professionals, the mailman, sometimes even the garbage. They are kind of our eyes, as well as my most favorite is the nosy neighbor. I don't know what we would do myself without some of these nosy neighbors who keep an eye on their neighbors, whether it be nosy or in a loving way. They actually know what's going on in the neighborhood, what's happening. And it has assisted us in several situations because they were actually able to talk about the comings and goings in that individual's home. So they are kind of eyes and ears for us as we meet with these vulnerable adults, whether it be their private home, nursing home, group homes. We meet with them in the hospital, unfortunately, when they're probably at their worst, when they're very sick. But they need us to go in and do that. And when I say we meet with them, by definition, a court investigator is the eyes, the ears, and the nose of the court. So we're physically going out, looking, seeing, and smelling a lot of times, and reporting back to the judge or the magistrate, whoever is presiding over the situation. So briefly, how a case comes to my desk as a court investigator. A couple of different ways. Family or an appropriate person, hopefully, is filing for guardianship. So they file paperwork and a guardianship application and an addendum, next of kin, and the most important piece of that application is the statement of expert evaluation. That statement of expert evaluation is completed by a clinical psychologist or physician, which indicates an individual is, quote, incompetent, can't make decisions for themselves. Whether they be in a crisis, whether it be a medical situation, they are not able to make that decision on their own because maybe they don't understand. So they need somebody to come and file, whether that, again, be a family, a friend, or if there is no one in the community or family-wise, we have some attorneys that can assist on those more complicated or guardianships where there might be some financial issues, as well as Summit County is lucky to have a volunteer program. So a lot of times agencies may refer to us guardianship when there is nobody available. Hey, we need an independent person to apply. I got a call from a hospital this morning and there's no family. And there's really nobody to apply and become guardian for this individual who desperately needs probably placement because their home is in such disarray and they're not taking care of themselves. And doctor has indicated they're not able to make those good decisions for themselves. So those would typically come to us in a referral, along with that ever important statement of expert evaluation. And then we reach out to, whether it be an attorney for that estate or complicated situation, or a volunteer. Our volunteers typically take folks that are in nursing homes, group homes, or assisted livings. And then we get somebody in to apply, or family that applies. So once they apply for guardianship here at the probate court, the case is given a docket number, and then it kind of filters to the court investigator. We then take that information that's included in the application and the expert evaluation and contact any collateral contacts. That's what I call you folks, doctors, nurses, social workers, people that have been involved, the nosy neighbor. And we then gather information from those collateral contacts and go out and actually personally serve the individual. Now, what do I mean by personally serving? We personally have to go out and see that individual to talk to them about, first of all, so-and-so has applied to become your guardian. The little example I'll use here is Winnie the Pooh. So Winnie the Pooh is our proposed ward, and Christopher Robin is applying to become his guardian. And I will go out to Winnie the Pooh and I will explain to him, hey, Christopher Robin is applying to become your guardian. I get a sense while I'm there what they understand. First of all, do they know Christopher? Second of all, are they aware of this guardianship thing? What does that mean? So we talk about that a little bit and explain it. And again, the court investigator is the eyes, the ears, and the nose of the court. So while we're sitting there talking to Winnie the Pooh, we're also looking around the home. We're hopefully talking to him by himself. Typically, it's a one-on-one. We don't want other people in the residence to be present. A lot of times those other people have a tendency to answer for the individual we're going to see, and we don't want that at all. So typically we talk about guardianship, who's applied, and by law we tell them when the hearing is, because there's always a hearing set here at the court. Now, prior to that hearing, we share with, in this case, Winnie the Pooh, you have the right to disagree with us. Back in the day, late 80s, early 80s, it was a deputy sheriff that would come out to the home. Uniform, hat, gun, the whole 9 yards, drop this on the kitchen table, turn around and walk out. Now we actually sit at the kitchen table and we talk about it a little bit. We explain to them their rights. You have a right to disagree. This doctor that completed that expert evaluation to kind of initiate the guardianship application, you have a right to have somebody independent to evaluate you. Prior, it was just an automatic. There were no rights. Somebody applied to become guardian and you got a guardian. when they disagree with the guardianship, they have a right to have representation, whether they have a private attorney to represent them or the court has court-appointed attorneys that represent individuals in the situation, so that they are able to actually give them a voice in court and speak for them and share their side of the story, so to speak. Because just because someone files a guardianship application does not mean that individual needs a guardian. That's usually the first thing I tell people when I go see them. You can get a sense when you walk in the door how they're going to feel about this. Just by body language a lot of times. Sometimes though you get a sense for, hey, you know, my daughter and I have a strained relationship. I don't know why she's doing this. She just wants to have control over me. That kind of person, you know, obviously is opposing the guardianship. So you talk to them about their rights. You can oppose, you can have an attorney, you can have an independent evaluation. You can have a friend or another family member go to court with you or for you, and you can name that individual. So the proposed ward, or Winnie the Pooh, is notified of their rights, and they're aware of what they can do and how they go forward. You get a sense sometimes when you go out serving a notice if an individual has some advanced dementia. I met with a gentleman last week, and it was pretty obvious he was not understanding guardianship or his current situation. And the idea of having, and you know, no, I don't need anybody to tell me what to do, was his definition of guardianship, which if I was sitting in his seat, that's probably what it felt like. But he didn't understand the real concept of what the guardianship was going to be, and his ability to have that attorney-client relationship and information that we received from the hospital and the doctors indicated that that probably wasn't going to happen. So in instances like that, this gentleman, actually the hearing is this afternoon, will get appointed a guardian. And then I think because he was in the hospital, typically by law, we can review these in 120 days. And he will be one we review in 120 days. I don't like seeing people when they're in the hospital because there's so much going on in their life anyway, and they don't feel good. And here comes this stranger from the court who wants to take my rights away. It's just very sensitive, and I don't like to do it that way. So that typically is the role of the court investigator. Now, I will hang on to Winnie the Pooh until something happens to Winnie the Pooh or until guardianship is closed. So he will be mine for the duration. And there are 3 of us that do what I do here at Summit County. Some of the states have people who are contracted, or I'm sorry, some of the counties have people who are contracted out. Of course, the bigger counties have people who are full-time, and that's what the 3 of us do. We're full-time. We're out in the field a lot and rely on people, collateral contacts. We rely on people in the community who are involved in these folks, and try to work in a collaborative effort to make sure that their rights are taken care of at the same time they are taken care of. So our older adults, or vulnerable adults, have a right to make decisions that we may not agree with. So you have to kind of separate yourself. What I would do in this situation is going to be different than what they do, and you have to show that respect and understand kind of where they're coming from. So I'm going to introduce you to my mother-in-law, and she knows I use her as a case study all the time. My mother-in-law is 90 years old. Or as I keep telling her, almost 90 wonderful, which she will be in July. She suffers from arthritis, some diabetes. She's got some mobility issues. She's got those gnarly arthritic hands. She lives alone. My father-in-law died about 6 years ago. And she still drives. The fortunate thing we have with her is she uses good judgment. She won't drive like to downtown Cleveland to one of her doctors. She'll ask somebody else to help her. She does kind of push the envelope a little bit sometimes, but she uses pretty good judgment. And the reason I use my mother-in-law is she is the type of individual that somebody would go into her home. She's got 3 walkers. Why on earth do you have 3 walkers? Well, she has her BMW, which is the one in the house, has the baskets and the whole 9 yards. She has one right off the kitchen door, which is in her garage, which she takes to her driver's side car. And then she has one in her car. But if she were to go to the hospital or tell somebody she has 3 walkers, they would think, oh, this woman is, something's wrong. Medication. You go into her house and she doesn't have a pill box and she doesn't have meds in the pill bottles like we would. She has them kind of set on the counter. And you would go in there, which I have with my court investigator lens, not my daughter-in-law lens, and go, whoa, what the heck's going on here? It looks a little disorganized. She explains it. It makes perfect sense. She can't get the pills out of the pill box with her gnarly fingers. She hates the tops. So all the pill bottles all have their tops open. There's a reason for that. But if you were to go in there and just look at it and not ask or not look at her as a person and let her explain, even though she's 90, you would think, wow, we need to do something with her. She's at risk. She's got all these pills. She's not managing her medication. She really is. She's also pretty impressive because she uses a smartphone. She's had a lot of lessons. She's not always real comfortable. In fact, she admitted that she panics sometimes. We told her it's okay. You won't break anything. You won't hurt anybody's feelings. She has a stylist because her hands are so gnarly to try to text. Heck, I can't text and my hands aren't gnarly. So that stylist helps her guide things a little bit to be able to send messages. We just taught her how to send pictures. So we kind of open up a world for her so that she can maintain her independence. She, if you look at her refrigerator, you'll be very frightened. It doesn't smell, but there's a whole lot of things in there like she was feeding an army. She's just this little thing, but she wants to have food there in case people come over. Family, neighbors, friends. She used to be a teacher, so she has a lot of connections and a lot of people stop by and visit. She wants to make sure that she has something there to offer. She has a cat. She claims that if she did not have her cat, she wouldn't be surviving today. So pets are obviously important. And that has helped keep her independent as well. She is also one who challenges doctors. If the doctor says something, she'll say, well, yeah, but what about this? Because of her lifestyle and what she knows, she can question them and say, yeah, I took that medication before, but it didn't work, or I had this side effect and it was horrible. So the reason I use her as an example, and I define her as the definition of self-determination, is that you look at somebody who's 90, and if you just look at her, you're going to think, oh boy. But if you sit down and you talk with her and allow her to explain and allow her to talk about her lifestyle, it opens up all kinds of windows for you to go, wow, she's doing pretty good for herself. So when we look at guardianship, we talked about that incompetency thing. Incompetent is when we do guardianship, we take an individual's rights away. The right to make decisions for themselves. I know that in the past, when you talk about losses, you talk about the loss of a house, loss of ability to drive. Those are all very huge impact on an individual. When you talk about incumbency and taking away somebody's right to make decisions, that's huge. So incompetency is when any person is so mentally impaired because of a physical or mental illness or disability, when we talk about the folks developmentally disabled autistic folks, as a result of chronic substance abuse, that they are incapable of taking proper care of themselves or their property, not paying their bills, falling falling behind, which has put them at risk in paying bills and managing things at the home, or family or people that they're in charge of by law to take care of. That's not my mother-in-law. She is doing all of those things, and if she can't, she asks for help. I had a case not too long ago, Bertha, and Bertha lived in a home where she allowed people in and out of her home. She had a nephew who lived in the basement, and going to see her, you walk into the home, she's very pleasant, she's dressed appropriately, she looks really nice on the surface. The house is freezing. Why is the house so cold? There's nice bananas and a new loaf of bread on the counter. You look in the refrigerator, there's no food. You look in the cupboard, there's no food. Bertha's nephew, who lived downstairs, was neglecting her. Bertha's nephew, who lived downstairs, was also dealing illegal drugs out of the home. Bertha wasn't aware of any of that. She was pretty content upstairs, although a little cold. And the reason she was cold is because the bills weren't paid. She wasn't oriented to the process of managing her finances and paying the bills. She was a victim of exploitation, but her nephew painted a picture of, well, you know, if I leave or if I'm not here, you're not going to be able to stay here. Bertha wasn't able to make good decisions for herself and a victim at the same time. I go back to the nosy neighbors. If it was not for the nosy neighbors, Bertha would still be in a really horrible situation. Incompetency, when an individual can't make decisions for themselves, they can't process the information to be able to make a good decision. Then we go to incapacity. That is more in the adult protective services arena. And any person who is impaired for any reason, to the extent that they lack a sufficient understanding or ability to make and carry out reasonable decisions. Reasonable decision is your daily living, eating, medication, bathing. Hoarders, individuals who are hoarders would fall into the incapacity. I had an individual not too long ago who had a fall. Prior to the fall, he was doing great. He was exercising, he was outside, he was doing things, he fell. Now he is restricted, has a walker, is forgetful, short-term memory, and to process things in order to make lunch or to make a phone call if there were an emergency. Not able to do that. He's incapacitated. He has a caregiver, family member who lives with him, but he's still incapacitated. Not to the point of incompetency, but incapacitated. And self-determination. I alluded to my mother-in-law's self-determination. The person has control of things. She's got control of her daily life. She has her routine when she gets up. She has everything laid out the night before. She knows what she needs to do. It wasn't that long ago she had fallen and broken her hip and had to go to a nursing home for rehab because she didn't have her routine anymore. Totally threw her off, cognitively and otherwise. And she really, really understood how important her independence and that routine that she had was for her, because she couldn't do that in the nursing home because that was something that they did. No, you can't take your med. I need you to take your meds now. You can't go sit and have your cereal and then take your meds, which is what she was normally used to. She has control over that. She has the ability to make the decision, decide whether, should I climb that ladder to get off the top shelf? No, you know what? I'm going to wait for one of my kids to come and do that. We were just there and put all her screens in. I could have done that, she said, but I didn't think it was probably a good idea for me to go out and wrestle with that screen and bring it back in through the house. You know, so she uses good judgment. She understands that something is a danger. Whereas Bill, on the other hand, would not. He might try to climb that ladder to go to that top shelf. So there's that judgment concern there. These are things as a court investigator, when we go out, we make an assessment of, because we look at things such as not only the environment they live in, but we look at their ability to do things. We'll ask them questions such as, you know, do you do your own laundry? You know, the daily things that we all do. Do you do your own shopping? Well, who does that for you? You know, who's your doctor? What medicine do you take? Those are kind of questions that we ask to get an idea of their understanding. Because in the end, when we go out and see folks, we need to look, is this self-determination? Is this incapacity? Or is this incompetency? Because we then have to make a recommendation. Because just because somebody has filed for guardianship doesn't mean there's a need for a guardian. I went out recently to a couple. Earlier in the year, there was a lot of disruption in their lives. Wife was taking care of her mother who had dementia, and the mother moved into their home. Her husband was just upset, anxious. His wife was taking care of mother, spending a lot of time with mother, wasn't necessarily interacting with him because mom was taking a lot of time. And the daughter she was doing the right thing. She was taking care of her mother. So as a result of that, we received a referral for guardianship. And that referral came in and an expert evaluation was completed. So at the time, things were, I think he called it just turmoil. And what was on paper, to me in an application, I actually went out and visited with him in person. Not the same case. It was totally different. Mom had moved into a nursing home because she became too much care at home. The turmoil, the anxiety, the stress was gone. This was not the same individual that was described on paper, which thankfully is why we go out and actually give these individuals the opportunity to agree, to disagree, to explain what was going on back in March and how it's changed now in May. That ability is huge. Otherwise, this gentleman would probably have a guardian today. So it's a matter of going out and seeing and hearing and smelling and reporting back to the court what they need to hear to determine to make a decision. Magistrate makes a decision on guardianship based on that expert evaluation, evidence from collateral contacts. That may be adult protective, that may be another agency in the community, and the court investigator's report. So in our report, we kind of paint a picture of what we see, what we hear, mostly what we hear on the visit, but sometimes from others, and sometimes what we smell when you open up that refrigerator and you think, whoa, you know, if I were to open up my mother-in-law's refrigerator and go, oh, this is really bad, something's bad in here. And she'll go, yeah, I agree, but I couldn't find it. Or she'll go, what are you talking about? It's fine. So all of that goes into our ability to try to determine and make our assessment of what's needed. And as a court investigator, we look at the less restrictive alternative. If guardianship isn't necessary, I don't want that individual to have a guardian. But if it is needed, then we've got the evidence based on the expert evaluation and information that we receive when we go out and see them. And then we make a recommendation to the court. And that's how the magistrate and the judge base their decision. As well as we determine who's best to be the guardian for that individual. And that usually comes out in the investigation when we go out and see the individual. Might be talking to other family members, might be talking to the nosy neighbor. But typically that plays out pretty well. There's a lot of responsibilities to a guardian. So anybody that's going to step up and do this, it's not an easy job. And it's not a job that's just Monday through Friday. This is something that is done every day of the week, every hour. And individuals who become guardian, whether it be of a loved one or our volunteers or our attorneys, that's a huge responsibility they're taking on. So kind of in closing a little bit, the court investigator's role, again, is very unique. And we report back to the court. And as the guardianship, once it's appointed, goes forward, there are certain things that guardians have to do. They have to file annual reports, which is a way of monitoring the guardianship. And we review those every day so that we do keep in contact with the applicants. And a lot of times the nursing home or the facility where the individual lives in. We have a close relationship with the social workers as well as the Summit DD system. And it's very important to have that so that we can make sure to be there to assist, to help out, or have them help us out in a situation. So in closing, we kind of have to look at how we see vulnerable adults and their caregivers, because a lot of times there's a little bit of caregiver stress too you have to assess. And with that caregiver stress, it can be kind of masked as maybe neglect, and it's not really. It's an individual that, oh my gosh, now all of a sudden I have to pay the bills, I have to do the laundry, I have to cook the food, I never had to do that before. What do I do now? And they end up worrying about things for themselves, and that individual is being neglected in the long run. So we kind of have to change how we see our older adults. We have to respond to one of care, concern, and compassion for them. And I think mostly we do that, but we need to then extend that and change how the world sees them. These vulnerable adults, whether they be older adults or not, they are our wisdom keepers. They're national treasures. The wisdom that we can gain from them and the things that they can teach us about their life, and be able to respect them for how they're living. That was pretty quick.
I have a question for you, Lorrie.
Absolutely, I love the interaction.
One of the things that healthcare workers encounter commonly is somebody who has power of attorney, who feels like by having power of attorney, they then become the automatic decision maker once somebody enters the healthcare system, regardless of their own, the patient's ability to make their own decision. Could you just speak to that a little bit? I don't know if that's in your realm or not.
Well, a power of attorney is a contract, so to speak. Okay, my husband's my power of attorney, then I have an alternate power of attorney. So if something were to happen to me, I'll use the other example. I'm healthcare power of attorney for somebody. Okay, that individual became very ill and was not able to make decisions. That individual chose me and another person to act in their best interest if something were to happen, but only if they were not able and capable of making those decisions or directing their care, whatever they needed at the time. So I stepped in and did that. The difference between that power of attorney and a guardianship is the individual I'm going to see as a court investigator is not able to enter in that contract. Now, I say that initially at the time of the guardianship, they're not able to enter in that contract. The couple I went to see, she was taking care of mom, difference on paper than what I saw. They ended up doing a power of attorney with each other. That was a less restrictive. So it's a lot of times it's the physician, the treating physician's call, whether they can understand. You got to understand that power of attorney document. If you don't, then folks look at guardianship. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Sometimes people don't always honor the power of attorney as much. I don't know why. I mean, it was put in place to avoid us here at probate court.
Yeah, like I think it's fairly common to get this case where the person with power of attorney thinks they have more say, really, than they actually do. I think that happens a lot in healthcare.
And I think that's the concern, Susan. You're right. I mean, I think that's the key, is that it doesn't kick in until the individual is not able to.
Yep.
And people, not everybody wants to make that decision either.
I have a question. I think I lost my video. Here we go. I have a question. So what's, does a guardian also act as executor on somebody's will?
Well, they don't have to. It's not a given. Sometimes they do, but it's not just because you're the guardian, you're the executor. No.
Okay. So the guardian, because durable power of attorney only, it has to be initiated when both parties are of sound mind, quote unquote. And once the person dies, then that legal document goes away, and whoever was the executor becomes the basically decision maker for, and this is usually around the financial side. So I was just curious if there was something similar with if there's been an appointed guardian, and the person that they were a guardian for dies, then does that end the guardianship, or does the guardian also have responsibility for financial stuff?
Great question. Great question. Guardianship ends at death. The guardian, there is a clause in the guardianship law that allows an individual to make those funeral arrangements. But other than that, it ends at death.
Okay. And then my next question is, does all of these procedures and things that you talked about, does that vary from county to county?
Yeah, probably. There are 88 different counties and 88 ways to interpret the law. And I always say that that's probably a good thing, because what works in Summit County is not going to work in Cuyahoga County, is not going to work in Clark County. I've always said that Summit County is so rich in resources. I mean, we're able to do this. We're able to collaborate and do things. You go to some of the other counties, the smaller counties, they have no resources. They don't have a NeoMed or a Center for Senior Health or a geriatric anything. And so interpreting the law, how it kind of fits your county, is a good thing. So to answer your question, it's going to be a little bit different from county to county.
Okay. And then my last question right at the moment is, as a primary care provider, how do I know which mechanism to use for someone if there's a guardianship issue, or I'm suspicious about what's going on between my patient and whoever the family member is? So in other words, looking at the distinction between, is this an abuse and neglect kind of thing going on, self-neglect, and does that mechanism need to happen prior to initiation of guardianship? Because it sounds to me like from your discussion, I missed the first few minutes, is guardianship gets initiated by someone who wants to get guardianship, correct?
Well, or there's a need for guardianship. It can be a family member or an individual applying, or it can be a referral from, and I'll use an example that we worked on this morning. We received a call this morning on an individual in the community. They have an expert evaluation, and they have a family member that's going to file. However, the individual, the older adult, is living with another family member who is probably neglecting and exploiting this woman. So the question comes, do we wait for the family to file the guardianship because they have the expert eval and they have the application, just hasn't been filed yet? Or should we do something, which I think your question is, immediate to prevent some risk of harm? And as it was, we kind of discussed it and said, look, if you guys go out, and in this case it's adult protective, if you go out and you see this woman is at risk, by all means, so then they file what we call a protective order. That's a whole nother talk. But adult protective has the ability to, based on their investigation, file a protective order for an older adult in the community to be able to either put services in their home to protect them, or in some instances remove them from their home if it's an urgent situation. Does that answer
Okay,
your
thanks.
question?
Yeah, that at least, yeah, that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, any suspect of any abuse or neglect of any kind of an older adult, don't hesitate, call Adult Protective Services. Anything else?
Marty posted a question. Do most counties have one or more volunteer guardianship programs?
Oof. We have one. Some counties don't have any. Franklin County actually, I think the Area Agency on Aging down there, take care of about 4 neighboring counties. So not everybody has a program. Some have multiple. Well, I can only speak of Summit. We have one volunteer program, and then we have our pool of attorneys that take the more complicated cases and maybe guardian of the estate, because our volunteers do not take, they do only person-only guardianships. They do not do person and estate managed finances.
Hi, this is Jen. Can you speak a little bit to the limitations of guardianship? Case example, recently had a consult in the hospital with the question of, does this person need guardianship? They were a resident in a long-term care facility, had a power of attorney that was involved, and really related probably to mostly mental health concerns, some waxing and waning of their cognitive ability to weigh risks and benefits of things. And the medical team was really pushing for a guardianship. I think really to try and get the person to go to dialysis regularly.
Well, and that's, as I say, our guardians do not come with magic wands and crystal balls. They cannot change an individual's behavior. And what you're saying there is changing a behavior. You can't really force an individual to do that. Now, it comes down to the ability of, do they understand the ramifications? What happens if you don't go to dialysis? Is there an understanding there? And then the other piece that you threw in, I think Dr. Drost, was the mental health piece. Is the mental health piece interfering with their ability to make a proper decision? Is it that they just don't want dialysis because they're tired? I'm done. You know, there's a whole lot of things to look at there, but a guardian is not going to change that behavior. And if you look at it, if a guardian could say, yes, you're going to dialysis, can you imagine that individual who doesn't want dialysis and being forced to go? You know, it's the action part of it. The guardian is to make the best interest decision for their ward, the individual that they have the authority over. So a lot of times what we tell our guardians to do, especially the volunteers, the moment you get a chance to sit down and talk with your ward, talk with them about their wishes. It goes back to seeing that person as a person they are, you know, they still may be able to make decisions about some medical care or what they want. As far as life sustaining, those are tough conversations, but conversations you need to have. And the idea of the dialysis is a tricky one. It really is. But I mean, a guardian can't really change that behavior.
I think that's one of those misperceptions with powers of attorney and guardians, that they're going to be able to, you know, if they say they go to dialysis, they're going to go to dialysis. If they say they're going to take their meds, they're going to make them take their meds. And it's certainly a limitation.
It's all about the action. It sounds good on paper, but I don't know how you're going to get individuals to do that when they don't want to. Yeah, we get a lot of telephone calls from family members who are panicking, especially lately. But, you know, I know we should have done this months ago, but we're going to do it today. Can we get a guardian like next week? Well, no, it's not quite that easy. Thank goodness it's not that easy. But a lot of families will want to, based on an incident that has happened, they're reacting quickly and say, yes, I need to do this today. I know we should have done it, you know, months ago. I've had a couple of calls lately on that. It's just not that easy.
Just one other question of,
Go ahead.
related to just, I think, again, one of the misperceptions, particularly around that statement of expert evaluation, is that it has to be a psychiatrist or a geriatrician that completes those, whereas really any licensed physician is able, by your license, to complete them. Obviously, whether you have the training and whatnot to do them is a different story. But how do you, you know, many, I think, physicians put up that barrier, just not going to do that. And how do you think that affects the whole process for people?
That's when with the older adults, that's when they usually call Adult Protective Services, and they get involved because they can then try to get these folks to places like Geriatric Doctor, Center for Senior Health, Akron General, to get that assessment. But oh my gosh, there's a lot of physicians that do not want to complete that expert opinion, yet they know that individual probably the best, and probably the best person to complete that. But the other thing is too, they've been their physician for many years, and as soon as they complete that expert opinion, that relationship, there's a big problem there too, causes issues. It does, it makes a big difference. I think that individuals, older adults especially, may be in a bit of a poor situation because we can't get that expert eval. At least that's what Adult Protective is telling us. See, we get it when the expert eval is received and actually completed. They're out there, Adult Protective and other agencies, struggling to try to get a doctor to complete it or get them to a doctor to complete these evaluations. It's very difficult. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's more just a talking point.
Yep.
Is it possible for a guardianship to be removed at a later date?
Did you say removed? I'm sorry.
Yes, like somebody gets guardianship and then the person's situation improves dramatically, let's say, and the guardian realizes that they're able to take on more and more responsibility. So theoretically, can you get guardian? I'm just asking, is it legally possible to get guardianship removed if it's in place, or is it one and done?
Absolutely, those are my favorite visits, because what happens is I had an individual several years ago who actually had a horrible stroke, and they really didn't think she was going to recover. And she went to rehab, went into an extended care facility for a while, and 6 months later, we get a statement that says she doesn't need a guardian. I talked a little bit about those annual reports. Included in those annual reports is a statement of expert evaluation that's completed. A lot of times that's when we'll get, hey, we can close the guardianship because, and the expert opinion from the physician indicates, and then we typically will go out and do a home visit or a visit wherever they are But absolutely, those are my favorite visits.
What kind of, so in a primary care office, what kind of documentation does the guardian provide there to, so that I would know that that person has a guardian, other than just somebody just saying that they're the guardian?
Sure. There's what we call letters of guardianship. And it's actually just a piece of paper that is notarized. Now, if you have a question, you can always get on our website and you can actually, under the name, go into the case docket and you can see that a person is appointed guardian.
Okay, thank you.
What goes into the expert eval? Is that just a summary? Is it a paragraph, or is it documentation of a physical, a cognitive exam? You see all that?
Yeah, it's detailed. It's a 6-page document. It used to be a 2-page front and back, but it's a 6-page document now, where it's pretty involved, and a lot of times doctors will attach some progress notes with it. There's a huge place for a comment section. We encourage doctors to put as much information on it as we can, because this is a big deal. We're taking this individual's rights away. And when some doctors or psychologists just check the boxes, that doesn't, and put dementia, doesn't help very much. So we encourage the doctors to complete the narrative part as well as to check the boxes.
And one last question. Do you notice some cognitive assessment tools being used more than others as part of that expert eval?
As far as the doctors doing the expert eval? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll indicate what they're using. Sometimes they don't. It just kind of all depends.
I just wondered if you saw one tool being used more than another.
Probably the MOCA is used more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
Probably. My little lady this morning, she got 5 out of 30. She's at risk. She's probably going to need a guardian.
But if we
Great
attach progress
presentation,
notes,
thanks.
those are taken into account?
I'm sorry?
Attached progress notes not on those forms are taken into account?
Absolutely. Usually what happens...
Totally made my day.
Yeah. Just so you know, the expert eval, the document itself, unless otherwise told, is public record. The progress notes by the physician are confidential.
Do we have any other questions for Lorrie?
I guess the only other thing I was thinking of is, thinking about somebody in primary care office or otherwise who has somebody they might suspect might need a further eval. Would the MOCA be that type of thing, or is there some short screen that's reliable that somebody would say, this warrants further investigation?
I mean, it kind of depends. A lot of times what I tell people is they're on the side of safety, because if an individual doesn't need a guardian, we're not going to appoint a guardian. That's why we have the rights. If the primary doctor feels that there maybe needs to be more thorough evaluation, maybe they need to go, if it's an older adult, see a geriatrician. Somebody who kind of can focus on that cognitive and MOCA and all of that more in depth than the primary care doctor does as a normal basis.
I guess I was thinking, maybe it's a social worker going out into the home, or, something like that. Someone who wouldn't actually be, doing a formal eval, but just as sort of a screen to alert them that there might be something more to look at.
Sue, this is Donna.
Hey.
So in the past, when I worked in the community, we used the MOCA, We also use tools like the mini cog. It's shorter to administer, and the clock drawing test. So we would use those as screening tools, which we're going to be doing with the new program that we're getting ready to start. And we could call maybe the primary care physician and say, hi, I was out seeing your patient. We did the screening tool. This is what they scored. Here's where the discrepancies were. And we're going to help facilitate getting them into your office. And then we could tell them the score, and that would help. And when I haven't been out in the community in Summit, this is going to be new for me, but when I worked in Cuyahoga County, we could take those screening tool results, and when we made a referral to Adult Protective Services, we could let the APS folks know that we screened them and this is what their score was. So they would at least have that, and if they needed us to send documentation for that court investigation for guardianship, then we could do that as well by using those screening tools.
Wonderful.
But remember that expert eval has to be completed by that physician. We can't
Correct.
by the social
Yeah.
worker or
Right.
the nurse or anybody else. And even the physician's assistant, you know, it has to be, it's very specific in the law. Licensed clinical psychologist and physician. Very specific.
Right, we wouldn't, yeah, no, we didn't, no expert evaluations in the community from us. Yeah.
Yep, great, thanks.
Just a caveat to remember is people can score perfectly on that and still really lack capacity. So
Exactly.
I think as Lori was definitely talking about, like sniff tests, the collateral history, like all those pieces are sometimes, or I would even say often, that much more important than, you know, the score on a test.
I've been doing this for 30 years, and I have never sat and done a clock draw or a mocha or anything else. Hey, I see you have a newspaper there. What's going on in current events? I haven't read the paper yet today. Did you have breakfast today? What'd you have for breakfast? Anybody call you? You know, it's to me, and I'm kind of old-fashioned, it's a better assessment. And Donna, yours work are great. Absolutely. I'm not taking anything away from that. You know, my little lady that got a 5 out of 30 today, obviously there's some deficits there. But I don't know whether they always have to be done, and especially in their home. When I'm in their home, I need to be respectful of their home. I'm not here to drill them and do these tests.
And I agree with you, Lori. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's part of that assessment process, is seeing how they're doing without having to do that testing.
Right.
Because them not knowing what they ate for breakfast, or how to take their pills, or how to call their daughter, or how to call 911, those are very telling things.
Yep, those reasonable decisions.
Yep.
Well, we are actually just about at our time. If anyone has any other questions for
I
Lori?
just had another thought that popped into my head. Kind of as you're going through that process of determining who may be the best person to be the guardian, how does, you know, perhaps intergenerational violence come into play? You know, if there is evidence or people are sharing the story about things that happened when they were young and now they're trying to be the guardian of their parent, does that get taken into account?
Absolutely. A lot of times we'll see folks with substance abuse and the dynamics of that with adults, parents, and kids. And yeah, it absolutely does, which is why a lot of what the older adult or the individual tells us is really important. I mean, I really appreciate what they say. I don't want so-and-so to be my guardian because we've had a volatile relationship. You know, it does play in a factor, absolutely, because we need that individual who is appointed guardian to be the person that's going to make the best interest decisions for that individual. A lot of times we'll get family in conflict. We'll get family that, you know, I've got one now, 2 daughters. of course I'm the better person to be the guardian. I live right here. Well, they haven't had a relationship in about 3 years, and when they did have a relationship, it was somewhat volatile. The other daughter lives out of state, and she's applying. So you have that dynamic. So if that dynamic ramps up to the point where when we look at it and the magistrate looks at it or the judge, and then we look at it and go, I don't know whether anybody has the individual's best interest here. We step back and maybe we'll appoint an independent person and not any family member. So it's kind of a case-by-case thing, but absolutely we look at those dynamics. That's a great question.
Which then makes me want to ask, so does the guardian have to legally live in the same state as the individual?
That's a good question, and I can't believe I didn't cover that. A guardian of the person only can live out of state. However, by rule of the Supreme Court, they have to visit their ward at least 4 times a year. If they cannot commit to do that, then they cannot be the guardian. On our annual guardians reports, it does talk about how many times did you visit, what kind of visits they were. Now, anybody can write 4 times a year. Anybody can do that. But a lot of times we kind of have an idea based on our involvement with this case to begin with. Yeah, I'm going to question this one when that report comes. I'm going to check with the nursing home. Did they really come in? Did they really check it out? So it's not just a piece of paper that crosses our desk. The guardian of the estate has to be here in the state of Ohio. So we have a son who lives in Philadelphia, and he's applying to become guardian of his mother here. But she owns property and has assets. He cannot be the guardian of the estate. He can only be the guardian of the person. So he's going to have to either look towards another family member or probably look at an attorney to take over the estate portion. Thank you for asking that.
So in the case of the 2 daughters, and say the court decides a third party is going to be appointed as the guardian, does the family have any appeal process that decision?
Oh, sure. Yeah, they can appeal the magistrate's decision to the judge. And if the judge decides the same, then they can keep on going if they want. They can keep appealing, to Court of Appeals or whatever. But a lot of times that's rare. It rarely happens because I think people step back and go, okay, I can still talk to the guardian. They're going to make the decision, but they're still going to listen to me, kind of thing. And a lot of times that's usually what happens if we get an independent person as a guardian. Our guardians are still going to talk to the family. It's not like we cut them off. Those guardians need those family members to still be involved, but the ultimate decision is the guardian. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank
I love the birds in the background, by the way.
you.
Thank you.
Lori, thank you so much for a very informative presentation. I heard you before and I still learned something new this time. So, thanks.
Thanks so much.